on behalf of Government of Gujarat, Department of Higher and Technical Education, iHub, and the entire startup community in the state of Gujarat. We have very distinguished panelists today. We have been talking about various agendas on innovation, entrepreneurship, ecosystem development since yesterday morning when Honorable Minister of Information Broadcasting, Prakash Javadekar inaugurated this program. The first session we had was the plenary of secretaries of different state governments doing their bit of policy push for ecosystem development. So we had that panel of policy champions. Then we had people like Nagarjan sir, different state governments, officers who are implementing startup policies. So we call them as govpreneurs, entrepreneur within governments. So we had a beautiful panel discussion about that. Today morning we had a discussion about the academic leaders, various academic leaders across the globe, how they are building their innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. Then we had a panel about early stage startup financing. We had angel investors, VC funds, and now one of the very important topic this session is going to discover how industry and startups can co-create. And this is one area where Gujarat government and our ecosystem want to dialogue, debate, and have discourse so that we can have a strategic roadmap for the state in this sphere of interfacing startups and industry. We have distinguished panelists. I welcome all of you to this session. We have over 10,000 people listening to you across this country, across various states and ecosystem. I thank Mr. Casey, who is a specialist custom engineer from Google. Thank you, Casey, for joining. It's 4 a.m. at New. And thank you so much for waking up early and helping us to understand how Google and all the entire corporate ecosystem is working with startups and your personal experience rather in enabling the ecosystem. You have been working half a decade now. So welcome you. We also have Anup Kiran. Anupji, it's great to have you. We had a few conversations last week. Anup is the head of innovation at STL. He looks after the open innovations and allied activities. And Anupji and his team, Rohit, has been kind enough, and we have been exploring how to learn from the good work that they have been doing. We also have Naveen Kumar, the engineering program manager from NetApp. Naveen was kind enough to talk to our startups last week. He explained how the ecosystem is evolving, and it's always a privilege to listen to Naveen. Thank you, Naveen, for joining today in this panel. We have Gauri Shankar from head of Merck's accelerator, Ocean Front in China. We had a wonderful session with Gauri last week, understood how the ecosystem is evolving, and he told one phrase which captured my mind. He says that if you can do this thing in Gujarat with large corporations and startups, you also have value and volume to deliver. And I think that's what one pickup area that I've been working. As I was telling him, we have large industries in Gujarat who want to closely work with startups and similar innovators. But we need to learn how that thing has to happen. What have been your experience? We have Atit Danak, the principal and head of Conext Zinov. It was rather Atit who connected most of you to us. Thank you, Atit, for being that plug point for connecting to Maverick people like Shruti and Casey and Naveen, all of these guys. Thank you so much for I thank Zinov actually for helping to connect to all of these champions. I also thank Shruti for joining today, Cisco's Launchpad. Shruti, we have been talking to Nandini and your team, and we're excited to host you today, listen to you, learn from you. And last but not the least, Sri Nagarajan, Commissioner of Higher Education, Government of Gujarat, Honorary Executive Director of iHub. Sir has been accelerating ecosystem enablement in government. So I can say he is also a manager of accelerator within government. So he's accelerating the ecosystem here. For all of you who might have met him first time, when he was the district development officer, it's a field level post when you join bureaucracy. He gave his office at the DDO office as a co-working space and tinkering lab. So he was the first such bureaucrat who allowed his office to be used for innovators. Because a lot of people used to come to his office and he thought, why not? Why not to tinker their brain? Why not to tinker ideas? Why just let them on benches and wait for a government bureaucrat? And then when he became the CEO of Smart City at Surat, he created India's first Smart City accelerator. Again, in touch with Cisco and Intel of the world, and he did a fabulous job. So wherever he goes, either he created an incubator of that department or an accelerator, and broadly he's accelerating ecosystem. So welcome you, sir, for this wonderful session. So having said that, I will invite now Shruti Kanand, the head of Cisco Launchpad, to share her thoughts. What are the things going on? What are the value proposition you see when you have programs like Cisco Launchpad? Could you just elaborate in 10-20 minutes so that we can get an idea?
Absolutely. Thank you, Srihiran Maiji, and the entire team at iHub for driving this fantastic initiative for the startup community, especially the student community, who we see as the next gen folks who are going to take on the mantle of not only the nation but the globe as well. So, thank you so much for doing this. uh, I would just try to rewind my own journey to share a snapshot of where I have come from and give a context to the audience today. So when I finished my graduation, I was at crossroads. Just like anybody else, I was also put through many rounds of placement, and I had a couple of offers from some of the multinationals and some of the startups. For whatever reason at that point of time when startups was not even a buzzword, it was a very gut instinct to go and join the startup. The sole reason being that the technologies that they were working at that point of time was super exciting. So that was the buzzword then, when we had the very first mobile phones, the Nokia 3000 series, which is very commonly known as the brick that would not break even when you threw it down from a second floor or a third floor. It was so strong. So that was the buzzword then. And the technology that this startup was working on was building the 3G and the 4Gs of the world. So it was pretty, as a student, I was very keen to go and explore into a newer area of technology. And it was a matter of not only luck, but a lot of hard work and persistence that at some point this startup was acquired by one of the giants, Cisco, which is, the reason I'm part of Cisco today, being part of that, been there, done that journey, seen through zero to hundreds of customers, which are the tier one telecom customers around the world. It's a very fascinating journey that I really appreciate the learning curve that one gets to obtain being part of the startup ecosystem. And fast forward today to where we stand in here, students are no longer at crossroads. When we look at opportunities of a startup versus a multinational, I think the students are far more forthcoming to look at some of the opportunities coming in from these startups, especially because of the agility that these startups bring in. But this is where corporates are coming in to kind of uh, take a stand and say, hey, why don't we get together the agility of these startups plus the stability of corporates? Thereby, you get the best of both worlds. So, being at the intersection, being at the epicenter of both the startups' agility plus the corporate stability places us accelerator at a very good vantage point, because we are able to drive not only meaningful opportunities for the student community, the people who are joining on, but also for the communities, for the outcomes for the communities that we are part of. We are able to drive digitization in a very meaningful manner by engaging with the startups on all possible applications on digitization. We at Cisco Launchpad typically work on three pillars. The first one being enterprise tech, which is the whole gamut of collaboration, security, networking, to name a few. And then the second pillar is all about driving IoT and digitization in various forms and factors like healthcare, retail, aviation, etc. And then the third pillar is around futuristic technology, where we work on some of the cutting edge work that comes out of research labs from the academia. And then we try to see how enterprises like ours can play a pivotal role for some of these futuristic tech. So, on these three main pillars, our foundation is laid to be able to work with the startup community, hand in hand with the startup community, creating a positive dent on all of the ecosystem, because this is not like a single man or a single woman show. We need to all collaborate, come together, the startup plus Cisco, plus the investment, plus the government bodies, plus the anybody else who's enabling this. It is important for all of us to join forces, because together I believe we have the power to go above and beyond. Atmanirbhar in its truest form. We are all responding with full force and vigor to the vocal for local. So truly committed to joining forces with the startup ecosystem and the student community. From Cisco, very happy to be on here and extend our support.
Thank you so much, Shruti, for elaborating and your story. And as you rightly mentioned, the agility of startups plus the stability of corporates. I think this is the simplest formula that we could realize how corporate industry could co-create. I think this is a wonderful way, and probably you having done that as a young entrepreneur, it speaks quite louder. And you also you are your own hypothesis and you are your own experiment to prove. I think wonderful, wonderful, Shruti. We'll come back to you with some questions. May I request Casey, the specialist costume engineer at Google? He has done a wonderful job in ecosystem development, and much of his experience could be real value to us. Casey, you want to pick up your brain?
Thank you, Hiranmaiji. Thanks for this. Thanks for having me here. So I would like just give you a small snapshot of where I came from and what I did in terms of like what is the job. I ran a couple of startup programs in India, especially on Google Cloud, and I've been working as a mentor for many other accelerators in the world, including Google Launchpad and accelerators of United Nations. So the whole point for me is looking at startup and making sure that they have they succeed in whatever they're doing at this point is something which is core value to me personally. So I've seen a lot of startups in their journey, and what I I definitely see a value for industry or in the corporate accelerators is two things. Corporate accelerators brings two things on board. One, a vast industry experience. Second, go to market. So if you look at all the corporate accelerators today, either bring you experience which is industry specific or give you a market access, like an entry into the market. So what, and I've seen even in terms of what Google does, I work with many. By the way, if you look at Google today, it has many accelerators on its own form. So we created accelerators for gaming sector. We created accelerators for in US for women entrepreneurs. We created accelerators for Black founders. So we have multiple and multitude variety of accelerators we built for a specific vertical use case, because I think the whole point of any accelerator we build is ensuring that we bring in the domain knowledge and also make sure that the startup understands how we kind of actually or provide them the best of industry experience. So the whole gamut of how we bring this on board is not just alone we sit and explain what we do, but also bring in the industry experience or industry experts into one community and give that access to the community, to the startups. So what I generally see is, for students in specific, like if you are looking forward to have a student wanted to build a company, typically the way I have seen a lot of people who are quite successful is building something unique in their, like I would say, what is the core IP they're actually working with. It might not be something which is repeatable. It might not be something which is which can be easily scalable. But what is the core IP they are bringing onto the table, which actually creates a lot of impact? So that's what I have seen. Most of the startups who have been successful in the places where I work with always comes with a specific domain knowledge which is unique for them. Now, the way I would definitely see going further, especially with a lot of industry government, like government sector, where I work with a lot of companies around a lot of state governments, is government is in a position where they can actually get this done in a way which is much more streamlined in fashion, because you have connects with industry experts, you have connects with go to market, and especially the problems of people real time on the ground. So I would say accelerators which are part of government has a lot of depth and breadth and of knowledge and industry experience which they can bring on board, and obviously that's the best experience any startup or a student can really get on the day one. So yeah, I think this is what I have seen, and this is what Google does, and this is what in future I'm looking forward to. I think more and more accelerators which are designed by government who can actually go ahead and give either startup experience or make them understand the problem, which will pave the way for a lot of young entrepreneurs to come on board, start working with them, gaining new experience, and at the same time solving problems for the entire ecosystem. So I believe only in one thing. It's not like I believe in a great partnership in general. So it's like you work with a specific startup, you kind of actually repeat the circle, you give it back to the society, you make it bigger and bigger. So the societal impact or social entrepreneurship is something which I corely believe in, because as you do right things for the society, you end up growing for the reason that you are appreciated and you are needed for that. So this is what I even tell any student entrepreneur, like instead of building a product, building an ecosystem and powering the ecosystem with a product will eventually make the entire startup a success case. You can see all the companies which were successful and had $1 billion revenue at this point in India created ecosystems. They never created a product actually, like being the best successful like Dunzo or Swiggy or you name it. Like all of them created a specific business model which is more building an ecosystem around and helping the communities around. And but the smart thing they did is actually they powered with a single product which can do all this job for them. So this is where I see a value in all over the world, and I see a easy access where you can take this product and launch elsewhere in the world, and you have enough people supporting you for that, and you see a valuation obviously growing up as when you build ecosystem based products like this. So yeah, I think these are my inputs on three different things: on what I see, what I go, what government has value in it, and how it can play a major role, especially government accelerators, given the depth and rich of information and experience they can bring on board. And the last thing is obviously where this is heading and uh, uh, what kind of startups would be most successful in the ecosystem right now.
Thank you, Casey, for this wonderful initial remark and showing us the contour for looking forward how this process looks like. I would like to now introduce Anup Kiranji, the Head of Innovation and STL, to address us. Anup has a vast experience of in building open innovation and startup engagement programs on STL and in earlier roles. So Anupji, would like to learn from you how you have been championing this thing at your industry. What are the generic inferences that we can draw from that? And what are your suggestions for us, like a state of Gujarat, to build a framework so that more and more startups and industries in the local context or global context can be interfaced?
Thank you, Hiranmai, for hosting me on this wonderful session. First of all, I would like to commend this entire team. This is a fabulous platform that you have created. Something, if I just look back into a couple of years, when I started this journey of innovation with large multinationals across the globe, I think this was something which time and again came into our minds that. Why is there a possibility that somebody could kind of create a platform which could help us connect with what we are looking as corporates versus the talent which is there in the ecosystem, the talent being individuals, being innovators, being startups, SMEs, whoever that is, right? Uh, Anybody who's willing to partner with a large corporate on innovation, on solving industry challenges, there always has been a gap. And I think this platform looks very forward looking, and it's very promising to me when I spoke to you a couple of days back. And I certainly see that we are able to bridge a lot of things that's come this way. And if I look at what can be done around this is the fact that if you look at how corporates come, right, what we have is like what was said earlier, rich experience. We got a large team, but alongside that comes two big things. we have a very high momentum, but that momentum is in one direction. And at the same time, we also have a lot of opportunities with the access that we have to the market, the access that we have to the global customer base. Comes a lot of challenges. Now, what we call as challenges at corporate could actually be opportunities for all these young budding entrepreneurs who are outside the corporate environment. And when we look at those aspects, the key thing is, how do we get connected? And when we talk about open innovation challenge, I think the engagement goes both ways. One is building the culture of innovation within the organization, so you are well prepared to kind of invite and accept, and more so absorb the innovations and the solutions which is coming from outside in. And if I look at the other side, when we go out through an open innovation challenge, or do a kind of a focused discovery and scouting of this, I think the key thing is how we are able to kind of create that matchmaking. And once we have identified those the right set of folks with whom we want to engage, then comes the series of things, right, which goes into developing the solution, providing mentorship, and the kind of financial assistance that is needed, the access to the environment which corporates can easily provide, which is kind of a kind of a real need for any of these startups who are trying to build solutions for the community, if I may call it. So these things are there, right at our disposal. But when we have such an engagement, I think this becomes the right place for us to ensure that we are maximizing the usage of this, and then there is a symbiotic relationship which gets kicked off, and we are able to come out with a mutually win-win situation. And as much as we are solving industry challenges, the startup is able to establish itself through its own, the product and the ecosystem that comes along these solutions. So I think it's a great way to get started, and we are today seeing a good amount of focus and drive which is coming, not just in India but across the globe. The engagement with the ecosystem is looking stronger, and it is going to get more stronger. So the thing is, how do we kind of ensure that there's a right matching that happens, and after that, how do we accelerate on the journey, which is kind of closely glued, and it is complementing each other.
Thank you, Anu, for the wonderful framework. We have Naveen Kumar, the engineering program manager of NATAP Accelerator. We had a conversation with Naveen the other day when we used to explore how Gujarat startups could work closely with industry. Naveen, we would like to listen to you.
Thanks, Hiranmay, and thanks, Nagarajan, for a wonderful discussion that we had. And just to all the young minds over there, right, I would just want you to pause and think, what is a startup today? When if you go back to the 90s, right, Infosys was a startup. If you go to the year 2000s, all the internet-based startups, right, the Make My Trips of the world, that was the startups for that generation. If you come to the tens, right, there's all the e-commerce driven Flipkart. And now, if you look at in the 20s, right, 2020, we have 21 unicorns in India. So we cannot anymore use the term unicorns. Probably, as Casey said, right, we should use the term ecosystem. But the one constant underlining under all of this is that there's been a government support. Every decade, there has been a change, unknown changes in the regulatory brought in just to support these entrepreneurs. What today you're getting an iHub as a platform is, right, you get at a very young age exposure to build something on your own rather than trying to rely on somebody else, right? You have an idea, you can germinate within iHub with the government ecosystem. And that's a really commendable development that's happened between 90s and what it is today. Now, how do you take advantage of it? And how do you build a product is up to you. So the world is an open space. What I represent is an organization that has been for the last 28 years. We still call ourselves a 28-year-old startup. The reason is the term agility, right? It's very commonly used, but to follow it is really difficult. A company, when it starts to go big, right, for them to reinvent a product becomes really challenging. And that's where the accelerators, the innovation programs within the organization come in to play a huge role. These are the things that build the company's innovative program or the entrepreneurial mindset into these workforce, as well as get the best ideas that are there outside what they typically work with. If you look at a startup, right, the way they approach the program is a 360-degree perspective. But if you are a corporate employee like me, right, our views are rigid to what our workforces are. We have a set processes, we work along those lines. So somewhere down the line, right, we need to renew the blood of thinking how do we do things differently. And that's where, if you look at it, right, most of the corporate programs that have started are in the 2010s onward. One way or the other, every company today has a startup program for the simple reason is, right, they need to innovate to survive. And that is where that is the key aspect where any corporate today will entertain a startup. Maybe it's a smaller company or it's a larger company, but they will. But what is the value prop that you as a startup can deliver? If you can bring down the cost involved for any of the processes, right? Or you bring in a process where it speeds up their product execution into the market, right? You have won a customer. That's as simple in today's world. And with this, I think we could open to questions when the next speaker finishes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Naveen, for your initial remark. We have with us Mr. Gauri Sankar, the head of Merck's Accelerator, Ocean Pro India and China. Gauri, we want to listen to you.
Okay. Thank you, Hiranmay. Thank you, Nagarajan, for setting the stage. It's always tough to go in as the last speaker in the room because all the great points have already been addressed. But I'll just share the story of how an industry like Maersk, which is apparently the largest shipping company in the world, kind of ventured into this area, right? If you look at this business, people call it definitely as a traditional business, and this is a common understanding for a lot of manufacturing companies right now, that you identify yourself as a traditional business, and which is in a way that we shield ourselves from the standard innovation, record. We say that, hey, it's not very easy for us to build a partnership with startups or to instantly jump into innovation as a waterboard. And being a non-digital native company, so where technology is not the primary business, we all have huge hesitance to jump into this area. So if you're a corporate and or an SME listening into this discussion, I just want to call it out that it is a huge value and it is important to venture into the startup space, and that's what we managed to do in the last 3 years. Parallelly, when I kickstarted the initiative for setting up a corporate accelerator shop for Maersk, we also kickstarted initiatives of a venture arm for Maersk, which is called the Maersk Growth. And both of these, ventured into, primary focus of one where we were building our own VC and venture activities. On the other hand, through Ocean Pro, which is the brand that we called out for, which right now has multiple identities. It is Ocean Pro in India, it is AIM in China, and we figured out that there is huge value in culminating this knowledge that comes from the startup. And I'll tell you the reason why I was fairly surprised. Globally, there's about a couple of hundreds of accelerators. As a business for logistics, there's only about 13 in the world. And if you look at shipping, then you're down to single digits. So it's very niche for us to identify some of these domains and industries, primarily because we assume that a shipping company needs only a shipping startup, or a logistics company, or a medical or a pharma company needs only a startup in the pharma space. It's a large misunderstanding, which is not true. When we started venturing into this space, we understood there's a whole lot of other areas that a startup can support a large corporate. We work with fintech startups, we work with AR/VR startups, we work with artificial intelligence startups. Right now, I'm working with a robotic startups which specialize in underwater focus. I've worked with startups on voice recognition and speech analytics. So the dimensions are open, and if you're a startup listening to discussion right now, just be aware that your customer does not sit in one area. So you have a huge possibility that you could step into any industry, any domain, as long as you're able to create that value. I think the previous speaker just put it out very right, saying that you're able to create that impact for them. Then nothing like it. And the last point that I wanted to probably sum it up is that so whenever we discuss about success of a startup, and then the recent times, it's been largely discussed about the valuation or how much funds it's raising. But in the olden days, we've always referred to it by the amount of revenue we make, right? How much money we brought on the table. That still holds good, by the way. So if you are a startup who's building products, and if you are able to, bring your product to light, always also think about how much, customers that you already have, how much revenue that you're able to make. Standard business norms. Just because you're a startup, it doesn't mean that funding is the only strength that you bring in. There's some studies about a couple of influential factors about what makes a startup successful. As a person who strongly believes in ideation and innovation, I thought idea is the biggest winner. Then I presume that maybe funding is the largest success factor, or what a startup manages to achieve, is influenced by what we call as timing. So be it a corporate, be it a startup, if you're able to time things accurately, if you're able to identify the right time for you to pollinate with a startup, for you to bring in a technology, for you to reach out to your customers and build a product that is of influence, and timing is the biggest effect. I think what iHub is doing in Gujarat is the perfect timing in terms of how we've landed this. And as students, the timing for you is also accurate, because you get to risk yourself at very early ages without having to put yourself at a lot of discomfort. When you have to try the same thing after 40, you would definitely understand how difficult it's going to be. So you have a great opportunity to build and experiment early enough and create the right impact for the industries, for India as a country. So good luck to all of you, and that's, I think, I'll close context for now.
Thank you, Gauri, for your wonderful words. Now we have our friend Atit Danak, Principal Head of Phonex Chinab. Atit, your organization have been very closely working with many of these corporates, and you have been a gateway for this program. So we would like to listen to your experiences of how we should unlock more value in this interface of industry and start working together.
Thanks, Ranma. Thank you so much. So, Gauri, I get to go last in that particular sense. No, I think Hiranmay, this particular panel is a great example, right? I think what we have on the panel is some of the largest companies in the world, but not just that, people who are really passionate about innovation, who themselves are trying to change the game within their company when it comes to collaboration, when it comes to co-innovation. And they're genuinely passionate about solving that particular problem. And in that sense, when I think of the startup community, and I think especially from a Gujarat startup community or student community perspective, I think nobody in the world doubts that Gujarat ecosystem in general has always been entrepreneurial. Some of the largest textile mills, chemical industries, biggest conglomerates in India can trace back their roots to Gujarat. The difference is that over the years, somehow we lost on the technology front, right? And we were not able to really adopt to that particular piece. Some of the smartest minds from Gujarat today sort of go out, study in different colleges, end up working in Silicon Valley, Bangalore, Chennai, Hyderabad, and they should continue doing that. But I think what we have today is an opportunity for a lot of that knowledge and that information to come back early on into Gujarat at a college level, where students get a lot more exposure in terms of what all is possible and are able to take on these, knowledge, information, experiences, and then turn them into potentially a product that they're attempting. When you look from a Google's perspective, from a Cisco perspective, from Maersk perspective, from STL perspective, from NetApp perspective, each of these companies are extremely hungry for innovation. They are hungry for talented people to work on cutting edge problems. And that's a wonderful opportunity in terms of using that as an option and making something out of it. To what everybody shared, odds are that number of startups corporates who are working with startups will only keep increasing going forward. To Gauri's point, it's not just about creating the next application, the next software. This innovation can happen in in chemicals, in shipping, in core industries, right? In glasses and ceramics. Any industry that we can think of, eventually the role is to remove friction. Eventually the objective is to add an accelerant in terms of pushing the pace, pushing the envelope. And all boils down to talented people and giving them the right tools and resources. To what Naveen said, now is the age where this talent is not being used to create services, but to create products, which is where we get to unlock a lot more wealth, a lot more opportunity. And that is what really excites me in this whole journey. I love the fact that I get to see and work with a lot of these companies, get to learn from different industries a lot, get to sort of work with the likes of iHub. I personally am very excited. I think the timing is great right now. What's happened in 2020, it's been a difficult year, but overall one thing has been very clear, that technology will be a very key player going forward. Innovation will be super critical. Entrepreneurship is the way to go out. If you look at the I think COVID-19 was the first crisis of India where the public sector and the private sector truly joined hands to figure out solutions, right? It was the first crisis in India where we saw technology being deployed, you know, on the edge. Every solution was technology first in that particular sense. It has given us a lot of parallels to draw, a lot of precedences. It depends on us what we do with it now going forward.
Wonderful. So you rightly mentioned about the first time the evidence of public and private sector coming together. I think this was really a phenomenal moment in the ecosystem, because when there is a crisis, there is no boundary and there is regulation. We see that in governments also. I mean, never before the trains of this country became hospitals overnight. And I think we have something. We have huge mass and also huge inertia. Whether you multiply to create a moment of inertia, or whether you want to make it a moment of change, that's up to us. How do we really drive us? So that's, I think, is a real. So I think what I will do is, now all of you have given your initial remarks. What I will prefer now is to pick up few questions for each of you, and then we'll have open questions where you can address that. So I will start from Shruti. So Shruti, you rightly mentioned that you started as an enterprise, you started as a startup, young startup, right, out of college just, and then somehow Cisco, giants like Cisco got you, and then finally you are now giving back in terms of your experience from 0 to 100 customers and getting it ahead. How was the situation like years? I mean, it might have happened years before. What was the factor of easiness for a startup like you to go to incorporate? What are the kind of challenges people like you used to face? And when you look back to young startups comes to you, how is the scenario now? How do you see these two landscapes? What has changed?
So just a quick clarification there, because I was not the founder of that startup, but I was one of the early employees of that startup. So really saw it growing from scratch there. Uh, there are two different perspectives I want to share in here. What has changed and what has not changed. What has not changed? Definitely the outlook, what you're creating, for whom are you creating? A customer first approach, a technology first approach. This has definitely not changed. Also, the domestic versus a global scale. Are we selling to the local consumers or the global consumers? Definitely starting with a global vision, but a local ecosystem, a beta ecosystem to test with. So, a combination, a hybrid approach, definitely has not changed. From then to now, I strongly believe both is required. A hybrid approach to adopt, creating and deploying a solution is required, very strongly required. What has probably changed is the outlook of people who are employees or potential employees of a startup. They're no longer being looked like aliens. People still think that it's now the cool thing, the in thing to be part of startups, which was not the case a decade or even longer back. There you were actually betting your lives, you were risking your lives. People wouldn't give you a marriage proposal if you were part of a startup. They would think, hey, are you not in a stable job at all, right? That was the outlook at that point of time. But I think that has definitely changed now. And right from freshers out of college willing to sign up for startups, to the government giving in so much of impetus to this startup ecosystem, especially the very recent one during COVID. It was so heartening to see how the government placed a very big trust on the startup ecosystem and gave us all the opportunity to build different kinds of innovation, right from what is required for healthcare to worker safety to a host of opportunities that were like thrown open overnight. So I think that trust definitely has changed a long way, and I'm sure this top-down approach has turned the light on. It has flipped around the approach, the way people are looking at it, big time.
Wonderful. I think you nicely mentioned things what has taken a loop in and things which have not changed. I think that's a beautiful perspective, and I'm sure the rate of change is changing faster, and that's what is the beauty of Indian ecosystem. We landed in the top three ecosystem, now in top two. I'm sure if we can make our fundamentals strong, like startups need to make their unit economics strong, if the ecosystem development need to focus on fundamentals, we can also be a very progressive ecosystem. I will Shruti come back to you for a while. Meanwhile, I want to go back to Gauri. I remember we used to have a conversation last week, and Gauri mentioned a very interesting thing to me. He told when they look for hunting good startups for their some of the strategic purpose in the marine industry, before they give the challenge open. I mean, I was just talking to him. I tell that how do you really seduce entrepreneurs to your organization? How do you really interface? And he told a very interesting thing. He told uh, our business units share the challenges, and once you float them, our knowledge partners bring in 100 odd startups from India itself who have demonstrated something functional technology in lateral or in the same domain. And then the entrepreneurs realize we can also fit into this. So they do try to solve problem in certain areas, and then corporates like Merck and others really gets value into it. So is the startups are also going a step ahead in terms of applying their technology, finding out right problems to solve, or do you think these industries can also seduce them better, faster, to kind of orient them how to appropriately position their skills to solve these problems?
Thanks for that, Hiranmay. So it's very true. I strongly acknowledge the fact that there are every single time that you come up saying that, hey, I have a great idea. I'm not sure if there is somebody solving it right now. There is definitely a startup somewhere in the globe solving for it. That is not a question of decision at all. Uh, is there a room to improve? Yes, there is a huge room for improvement, given the fact that many a times, they come with, I would say, limited implementation or scale, because of which they end up losing the opportunity to cut it for the customer. Uh, Many a times, our role as an accelerator primarily sits in that space, right? So many of us here try to sharpen that and ensure that the gap is bridged between what is expected from a corporate versus what is available with the startup. But many good products I see lose that edge because of the primary reason that they are not sharp enough, or they haven't really managed to achieve what is expected in the near customer's end. So there's a room for improvement. And the second point that I would probably want to make is that the focus of understanding where their customers sit is probably very limited. Many times, if you end up talking to an AI startup or a fintech startup, their applications are largely global. You could, as Asit was saying, that hey, it can be in a chemical industry, it can be in a textile industry. It is not limited to a tech native company alone. It's not limited to a bank alone. That change of thought process is something that startups can start inculcating, asking them to focus more on the larger market itself. I've worked with companies who specialize in image recognition and AI, and many of them were still working with insurance as a space. But there was a huge opportunity in the marine industry, and we had to kind of open it up for them, saying that, did you even know that this is a $2 billion industry globally, annual expense on that area, and then it is like, oh really, and that's how it starts. The conversation kicks in. So, in spite of having the right tech, in spite of having the right knowledge, not having the awareness of where the potential business or opportunities are sitting, some of the startups lose out on a huge market and impending revenue which follows right after. So that's probably an area that I eyes open for where you could, play a role, and that would definitely change the game significantly.
Wonderful. I think the scope of improvement is always there, and I think all of us could really figure out how to get it going. Casey, one of the I think Google is one of the organization who is quite hungry in terms of looking at technology startups, and particularly tech startups who can really go to the next curve. And not only Google, all the tech giants in internet space are very keen to look at who are those next people who could really disrupt the game. Uh, we have been closely associated. You have been personally mentoring startups. You have been at a professional capacity also has been involved with the startup programs. Do you see changes of mindset of young graduates and young entrepreneurs coming out of incubators, universities today and 5 years before? So, how do you see? Because you have been personally mentoring a lot of startups from your programs and also individually. How do you see the change happening? Which are the major facets?
That's a great question. So, the great change, the lot of changes which are happening for last 5 years is one. When I came out of college, if I go and tell my father I'm going to have a startup, my father would be really paranoid, given that it's he is a middle class person, and he obviously have needs his kid to be learning something or doing something for money. But today there is a generation like us who are like kind of are open to give their kids or students some time before they end up going to a job or go ahead and work for do a startup. And most of the students today are open to take that risk. Like it's not a bad thing to go ahead and achieve something. And if it fails, I mean, it's always good. If it fails, you gain experience. And by the way, if you see the statistics, a lot of people who ended up failing in a startup would end up going to larger companies, becoming more than a software engineer. They're respected for their experience and what the risk they have taken and the knowledge they come up with and join another company. So their career is not stopping there. So you have a clear path of you going out of college, and your parents are supportive and they're well paid enough. Might not be everyone that, but there is a generation of parents who are okay to give the kids an opportunity to go and take the risk. Kids are having certain time before they end up moving to a company for a job. They can go ahead and take that. So this is what a major shift of changes. The risk taking capability, the parents or the family encouragement to give which was given to these people who wanted to try and go out and work for a startup or do a startup of their own. And the third one, which I clearly see, is I don't care if I fail attitude. That's very important. So people are no longer afraid of failures if something goes wrong in a startup, if they build something and they fail in that. So these are the shifts I see for last 5 years, which are growing, especially in India.
Thank you, Casey, for that wonderful explanation. I have been asking this question, the delta, because around 10,000 people are listening to you, and most of them are, young generation. They're trying to understand what happened to Casey and Shruti and what is happening to us. So, this is what is their interesting point. I can see the questions in their Facebook. Most of these guys are asking. So I thought to clarify that that Casey used to get the same food and same shelter and everything else. Only thing is the ecosystem was different. Now these guys are more lucky. Now they have iHub, every hub around them. We give them money, and just for your information, let me tell you, Gujarat government has very, very strong approach for long-term ecosystem building. We have 3 startup policies. The first startup policy starts with the pipeline creation of innovation. So that is what Department of Higher and Technical Education implements. So what we do is we give 2 lakhs rupees, peanut money, to 1,000 teams every year from different college and university. You just come with one page of plan. This is what you want to do. And you ask these guys, go back and in 6 months come and show something working. And out of these 1,000 teams, we see 50% coming back. And they say, now we have got this money, we have done this, now what? So then we have another policy which gives them additional up to 25 lakhs rupees. So what do they do with their money is convert these tabletop proof of concept into a minimum viable product. And around out of these 500 odd teams, we get around 300 odd teams who convert those proof of concepts into a minimum viable product. And then when they come back to us again next 6 months, they say, okay, now what? So then we pick up around 150 and 200 odd people and give them to next level of market interface, industry interface, and ecosystem interface. And therein people like you plays a very vital role. Because by that time, these 150 or 200 odd teams, these are average 23, 24-year-old young people, they have an MVP to show on the test. And now these people, they go on registering their enterprise, and then they start tasting the first blood of enterprising. Most of them are first generation. Most of them come from middle class. Most of them come from working parents. But the beauty case is, last year, out of this cohort of around 200, more than 30 graduated with a convocation degree along with a $500,000 revenue. So this is a very interesting point. This is a very changing scenario in the student venture ecosystem in the state. There are students before graduating, they're also building company, they're creating jobs. Rather than going to placement offices along with friends, they're hiring their friends. And one of the young startups that they told me, sir, I really enjoyed. I told what happened. He told me, I was an average scorer guy. I hired somebody as a first set of employee who was double the CGPA than me. So I'm really proud that I could do good. So these are exciting times. The young people have fun building things, fun of failing. So I think this is a phase of new changes, new experiments. And I think all of you will agree that as Shruti mentioned, as Gauri mentioned, when Honorable Prime Minister talks from grade 4, that Startup India is something that we should do, I think it legitimizes the efforts. Initial days, all of you used to do, and people used to think that you were an exceptional standard deviant, but now it's a mainstream normal. So I think that's how the ecosystem is changing. So Anupji, I will come to you. You have been doing a lot of open innovation efforts. You have been engaging with industry, corporates, and also academic innovation centers and all. Would you highlight how do you take care of the IP issues? Because sometimes some startups become little curious about how do we really approach an industry, how do we go ahead, how do we interface. So how do you do this interface, and after all, how do you take care of the IP?
In fact, Hiranmay, that's like a very brilliant question. And whenever we go for a formal engagement, this is the first thing which comes into the mind. On one side, behind the mind, they say like, hey, let's just get past this. On the other side, you will see a set of people who are holding the fort very strongly on the IP. So it's a very tricky situation. But however, it's not a non-stopper. It depends on how we are able to kind of navigate past the IP sentiments, right? And I tend to put it more around the sentiment space because it varies from institutions, it varies from individuals, it varies from company to company, right? I have been doing this in 3 separate corporations, and each one had its own approach. And if I look at academic institutions, right from the global standards to even small individuals, everywhere this clause gets taken with a completely different notion altogether. So the approach to do this is, I think IP should not be brought on day one. We should kind of allow, and especially for the startups and the innovators, I would say the best way to navigate through and to accelerate is to have the IP at a later stage, because by that time both of you have become more comfortable. If we bring the IP right at the beginning of it, everybody tends to get very defensive. You're talking about an IP for something which you've not even created. You're just imagining that I want to hold the IP of something that does not exist, right? So our approach has been that, let's understand each other's interest. Keep the IP aside. Let's understand each other's interest. Are you looking at building something? Are you looking at some kind of an exclusivity? Are you looking at solving an existing challenge in an alternate way? Depending upon what those challenges are, depending upon who's on the other side of the table looking at it, we have to find a way to kind of make through a value proposition which is win-win for both the parties. And to this, at STL and back at AmDocs, we have a good patent and legal teams who are well versed with this environment, and it also goes with the learning. As much as a startup is getting to learn about corporates, I think the corporates are also learning about startups, and so is this legal team. So the best scenario is during any of these engagements, involve this team right at the beginning and start with a basic engagement, right? Which is sometimes as basic as a non-commercial MOU, which gets organized between the two, to ensure that we are committed to work on this. We are committed to support each other in the initial stages about mentorship. We are committed to provide them areas on a physical environment or technical walkthrough of the plant or of the space, or even kind of sharing those challenges. It starts with that, and slowly you get into developing the solutions. You start getting comfortable with each other. You start realizing what was an idea at one point in time has now become a prototype. It's now very apt into building a solution which runs on the field, and you're able to kind of look at it more constructively as to how this is solving the world challenge. And you also see there is a commercial value prop around it. By this time, you are able to better identify what clauses, what exclusivity, what IP terms you need to negotiate. Otherwise, what you have probably started at the beginning, by this time your product has changed, your offering has changed, and perhaps you're looking at a completely different use cases. So something that you signed earlier is not valid now. But as you take it this stage of it, and you then look at it from a value prop, you're able to tie this everything together, and you know what is the roadmap ahead, and you also start believing that you can drive this into a scalable business. Or are you talking about a single product, or are you talking about a very small area out of it? Sometimes I've even seen that people are willing to let go as well. So this is a very interesting concept. I would say park it at the right timing, and that's what is the key.
Wonderful. So here is one point. I almost got an idea. So now all of you, particularly the startup accelerators in corporates, you onboard people, you hunt for good startups. Sometimes they get crash you, and then you engage them in a meaningful manner for creating value in a stipulated time period. So in that process, how do you kind of measure measure the process of engagements, or how do you ensure that you optimally take them to a level, because they don't come for 3 years or 2 years, they come for a shorter period of time. So how do you really engage them more meaningfully? This is an open question. Any of you can pick up.
I'll take a stab at that, Hiranmay. So let's look at how do we engage. I think the first piece is the initial phase of discovery, where we call it the startup speed dating, right? You just come meet for 15-20 minutes, you have a power pack session, and you kind of understood whether we can kind of map this into any of our roadmap or not. But what happens after that is in the hands of both the corporates and also the partner on the other side. And by partner, again, I would say it is individual, it is startup, it is the academias, right? So how do you want to take that ahead? And you should every time there should be kind of a progress that goes into the next step, which takes you closer to the commitment. So when we have looked at it, second time you talk about more like a blueprint. Third time you come talk about developing a prototype. Fourth time you're talking about building that into and taking it to the field. Fifth time the journey continues. And as long as you're able to connect yourself with the value system, I see the engagement continues. It could sometimes things materialize in 3 months' time. Sometimes I've even seen things go on for a year and a half. But if you're able to connect yourself with the value system, if you're able to see the engagement maturing to the next step, And it's kind, like I say, it's a learning ground for both the teams, right? It's not that the one team has an upper edge of the other. It's a co-creation model. It is partnership. As long as you're able to see the value, you are able to mature yourself into the next stage, and the passion continues and the engagement continues.
Wonderful. So very lucid explanation. Atik, I just want to come to you one for a question because you at Genome has been very closely working with industry who have keen passion on startups. If I look at panel today, majority of you come from global corporations, global enterprises, having deep hunger for innovation and startups. Atik, you might have also seen Indian corporates, Indian industries. How do you see this phenomenon also working in Indian companies? We have a huge amount of industries in India, maybe small, medium, large. We have a huge pool of large companies also. Do you think a different approach, or are they catching? What's the call?
I think they're catching up. There's a lot of ground to cover in my. Frankly speaking, I would have loved for Indian corporates to be a lot more active in the co-creation space. That being said, if you look at, for example, financial services, the whole BFSI segment, I think there's a lot of activity happening across corporates. I think earliest we saw was someone like a Yes Bank being supremely active, but over the period, a lot of NBFCs have become active. Among conglomerates, Reliance as a group, and now because of Geo, has been extremely active over the last 5 years. I think we are seeing something similar happen in retail space and also in CPG space overall. But that's about it. Not beyond, that so much so. Um, and I think there are certain fundamental reasons to it also. And this is something, I've always wondered why it is. So just to give a context, I come from a manufacturing background, right? That's my first job on the shop floor. And then I also come from the classic Gujarati piece of doing exports, right? The whole import export piece. And Gauri, by the way, I think Maersk is fairly popular in that sense as a brand, with all the containers moving around. But I think one thing which I've always been kind of amazed with is that somehow the industry level cross collaboration in Indian companies, where Indian financial services major will go and talk to their peer. Similarly, in chemicals, somebody would talk to their competition, has been traditionally low in India compared to, say, China or Israel or US. And that is one thing we need to fundamentally change. If you look at the genesis of a story of, say, Tel Aviv or Silicon Valley or Shenzhen or Shanghai or Beijing, what you would notice is that the first set of companies who came in there, they used to collaborate a lot with each other. They used to share a lot of information, and that helped each one of them sort of progress further. We saw something similar in Ahmedabad also in terms of textile mills back in the day, where Ahmedabad mills ended up surviving a lot longer than any other part of the country in terms of that textile industry which was there, predominantly because of the collaboration piece which is there. So I think that's one hurdle somewhere, whether it's as an Indian entrepreneur in a family business or as a leader in an Indian company, we need to find a way to sort of break that barrier which is there. But yes, overall, I think one thing which has been really interesting in the last 3 to 4 years is that because of the Honorable Prime Minister's push on Startup India, a lot of PSUs got active. And that also was a very interesting situation, is because you saw PSUs working with startups. You saw some, BFSI companies working with startups, and people in between started to ask that, hey, why are we not doing something? So with each passing month, each passing year, we do see a lot more conversations happening. And I do believe that this year, what we have seen with Reliance is going to propel a lot more companies to actively engage with the startup ecosystem. But yes, there's a lot of headroom. This is where I think iHub can really help push, the industry. We might have to do something to make it easier for them to start working with companies potentially.
Wonderful. We are excited. So now we have a vested game that we are trying to play for the ecosystem, and this is what I will open it to all of you to suggest us. So we have at least 100 progressive medium enterprises around iHub who are making at least 100 crore revenue, and most of them are innovative companies. They have been clients to ISRO, and they have been working with Tesla. They have been working with all big companies. Now we have been closely interacting with them, and that's what we can say, we are intellectually seducing them. How to let them come forward and our startups get a coffee with those CXOs, CTOs, and understand how they can interface. So we are keen. So we are keen to co-create with industries, cooperate. Obviously, we'll reach back to all of you. That's one. We are also looking at how do we localize this interface, because Gujarat is a very industrialized state. We have 70 clusters. Each cluster is a domain expert cluster. So ceramic is Morbi, chemical is Bharuch, textile is Surat, manufacturing is Rajkot. So we have strong base of industries. And these are innovative companies. They have been supplying to the world's best companies as partners. We are trying to see how do we create this phenomenon of co-creation locally also. So we have been talking to them, we have been understanding what is their need, how we can do. So I will come back to Anuji. What are your suggestions? How do we design this strategy? Obviously, this is not a secret sauce, this is a common method. But how do we really make this strategy so that in next decade, if Gujarat ecosystem need to be differentiated from other ecosystem, this could be one of the differentiators that our startups has a very strong interaction, interface, and engagement with progressive industry in the ecosystem. How do we move ahead?
I think for the first, this is a very basic point that we need to look at as startups, as entrepreneurs. They need to be at the right place at the right time, because corporates like us are constantly scouting for solutions or partners who can resolve many of our industry challenges. Sometimes we open it up through Open Innovation Challenge. Sometimes we kind of express this in various forums, and sometimes our team are discreetly scouting for such solutions as well. So the first point of interjection is these startups having having the representation made in the radar that we are operating for, or we are looking for, coming in that range, right? That's number one. Second, after having established this, the getting into the next milestones in terms of how can they produce a value proposition which is different from what we have been traditionally looking into. I'll give you a simple example. We are in the business of telecommunications, and what we have seen is folks who have no relation whatsoever with telecommunication, but these are the folks who are working on a chemical industry, folks who are working on electromechanical, folks who are working on artificial intelligence or even robotics, right? Now, they will not be a direct connect that would come in our radar sweeps. But when the opportunities are explored, when the challenges are expressed, I think it would be key for these startups to kind of make a direct approach to us, and that way we are able to even give a specific attention to kind of a use case that they would be able to develop and showcase. Now, it could be on a piece of paper, it could be through a working model, or it could be a demonstration of what they already have in perhaps an adjacent industry. If this thing can be brought out to us, for example, we have a very open system where the innovations that we do is listed on our portal. We have our a link which is provided, innovation at stl.tech, right to us, and it is manned 24/7 by the team. So anything that comes to us, we are committed to taking those engagements ahead, and we believe in doing this faster. If it makes sense, we continue the conversation. If it does not make sense, we provide the inputs, and the same philosophy that you follow, right? It didn't work the first time. Maybe you can come back again with the second value proposition to see how it can be taken ahead, and driven more so into a valuable proposition. Third aspect, I think, which is more important, is most of the time the focus goes into the core, which is the product and the offerings and things like that. But the place where it gets stuck is the secondary aspects, which is in terms of commercials, in terms of building it on a scalable model, and in terms of the, sometimes the IP or even the business models, right? Sometimes you have produced a solution, but if the solution is to be bought by a company like STL, we can still do that. But if it's to be done on a wide scale basis, I think we need to have a business model innovation also done around it. So I think these are the places, if that happens through, we can actually see things flying in leapfrogs.
Wonderful, beautiful, beautiful. These are music to our ears. Gauri, would you like to address the same question?
I can just add one more point to what Anup shared as well, right? So, um, given the fact that there's a huge opportunity for startups in terms of collaborating with corporate. Um, it's not also restricted to only to corporate relationships, right? So as you rightly said, some of these uh, companies need to start talking to each other. Like how often I've seen a number of cases where a startup adds more value to another startup when they go in together. A collaborative efforts between multiple startups, and how we can start, influencing MSMEs and SMEs to start looking at startups as a solution point of view. Because very often we kind of reserve startups to collaborate only with corporates, and that kind of steals the opportunities to a bare minimum, right? On the other hand, as you rightly said, there's almost 500 companies in Gujarat which does revenues in a couple of hundred crores a year, and for them, these startups can be a lot more lucrative option to look at. If companies like ours, which has a global operations, MNCs, where we're discussing billions of dollars of revenue, if startups are a great opportunity to take advantage of frugality and quick innovation. For MSMEs and SMEs, it's a much bigger window, and that will work better if they collaborate together. Like how Asit said that in how Ahmedabad textile mills survived better is because they spoke to each other. Similarly, if MSMEs and SMEs start interacting with each other, collaborate together, then you see a lot more window for startup collaboration to happen in an area of focus that we didn't really imagine. So that's probably something that I can add to what Anup has already.
Thank you, thank you. When we listen to you, we become more optimistic. That's a significant amount of gain from all of you. We are like swans. We are trying to draw energy from each of you and move a step forward to build the ecosystem forward. Now, towards the end of the conversation, before I invite Mr. Nagarajan to summarize the conversation, I would like to listen one suggestion from each of you, right from Casey. What is that we should do in the government, in the government of Gujarat, iHub, and our Department of Education to ensure that we are straight, right our goals, we move towards the right direction to build a progressive tech-enabled startup ecosystem in the state of Gujarat. So, what would be one suggestion that each of you will suggest to us what we should do right now, looking at the next decade leveraging point? Should I start with Casey?
Sure. I mean, you guys are doing great at this point in terms of actually, can you hear me? Yeah. So you guys are already doing great in terms of bringing the ecosystem together. The testimonial to that is the event which is happening now. So what I wish to see, or what I wanted to see more, obviously, is what I have seen. What startups actually suffers a lot is two things. One, the legal process and the process which they wanted to set up the company to get it done. The process it takes to actually build a legally form a startup. And the second one, for all the accelerators, this is personally my thought when I was working, or when I wanted to see what is the right startup for its particular use case, a kind of startup registry, a kind of startup central registry, where you have all the startups within the state listed out, so that everyone have a transparent view of what exactly is the startup doing, so that anyone can confidently reach out to the startup or to you directly, and get connected to the startup. So I think these two will accelerate what you are already doing at this point, and also make sure that all the accelerators in and around the ecosystem can be benefited. At the same time, startup also can go ahead, and any new startup who wanted to set up can do that more easier than what they're doing today.
Shruti?
I think that was a wonderful suggestion from Casey. In fact, if there is a possibility, you should also add an additional option to review, leave a rating for those startups so that anybody else consuming those services would be able to be better positioned to take a decision. I would like to add one more different perspective. Now, when you see the spread of some of these startups being created, a lot of them are coming in from areas like, say, Ahmedabad or Bangalore or Delhi. They don't really understand the problems as is, like at the core of what it is. If I'm going to design a solution for some of the export industry, unless I'm there at the fore, I do not know the exact problems that are happening there. So how can I claim to even solve it before getting that immersive experience? So it would be very helpful to have a platform, just like LinkedIn or a Facebook kind of a platform, a registry like Casey mentioned. This is more of a challenge registry or a problem registry where people can come on and register saying that, hey, this is a problem I'm currently facing and I think technology intervention can help solve it. Back in the days when I was a student and we were all doing our final year projects, which was supposed to be a big one, I was struggling to actually find out what were some of the real life problems that could be solved. But there are tons of those problems that are not maybe within our immediate ecosystem, not in our immediate vicinity, but there is something else that we could do with the help of using technology as an enabler. We could really solve for the people. So having that kind of a challenge registry would be very helpful for people to encourage students to actually go and address those on the registry.
Wonderful, Smriti. I think this is a brilliant suggestion. We will do that. We have our Commissioner of Higher Education, Magazine, sir, with us. So he will ensure that all these things are going onto the ground. All universities and all colleges comes under him. So anybody who is getting a degree in the land of Gujarat, so Nagarjun sir is the enabler for that. So he is listening to all of your ideas and he will do it for sure.
No, I was actually at Kutch, one of my recent holidays. I was there getting, shopping from some of those local weavers. Wonderful stuff. Nothing that you would get in the other parts of the country. But if I am back in, say, Bangalore or Chennai and trying to shop for those, I don't have a means to do that. I still want to contribute to that ecosystem, but I don't have a means. So really, it would be helpful if iHub and the Gujarat government acts as a bridge to help solve those gaps.
Absolutely. We are the bridge contractors in terms of the ecosystem. So we'll do that. So we will ensure, Shruti, you have offered a wonderful thing and we will ensure that we will get that going. So Gauri?
Okay, so since I think information collection or registry is a great thought, and I'm going to try and add one more to it as we move along. Visibility of accelerators that are available in the country is also limited at a domain-centric level. For example, after I stepped deep into this ecosystem, I got to know that there are accelerators in real estate space, pharmaceuticals. There is accelerators which is focusing on just assistive technology alone, helping people to build better prosthetics, better braille writing. So there are accelerators of multiple versatilities, and that is not something that all startups are aware of. So creating that visibility is one great importance. And second, that I would probably request as state government is to start doing a lot more interstate collaboration. Though the startups are born out of Gujarat, I'm assuming that their market is much larger than that. And getting the opportunity to work with multiple states, opening up cross collaboration efforts will definitely create more venues. And the last one, that's something that we're trying as part of my contribution towards Bangalore Chamber of Commerce, is to bring our directory members, all the MSMEs and SMEs, and give them an exposure discussion, which means that, hey, you're all a part of our membership. Please meet us. We are about to tell you what are all the startups that exist in and around your industry, and that could be a very easy effort given the connections that a government can build. Get all your textile mill companies to a single forum and start discussing about all the possible automations that can happen at an industry level, at an IoT level, or even at
Nice. Wonderful. Naveen ji.
So had.
Wonderful.
Hope I was
Sorry,
audible.
Gauri. I missed your words. I thought you paused. Sorry. Naveen.
I think adding on to what Casey and Shruti and Gauri has said, right? It's good to have a registry part, but coming back to say, right, not all startups are successful, right? As you rightly mentioned the last time we spoke, right? Naveen, if they come back with three ideas, right, only an idea can fail, an entrepreneur cannot fail, right? The only person who could actually help them today in this problem is you. When I say you, is the government. That how fast can they shut down a startup? Not every startup success, because it's a legal entity, right? A legal entity, if it could be closed down without much discomfort to the founder, right? Within certain period. I mean, that's open to legal, how the government wanted to invest. Then it becomes easy for a student, right? When he opens a startup, for whatever reason that idea doesn't click, he closes it legally. Then he either goes for a job or he gets an opportunity to, start a fresh one. I mean, starting today in India is really easy, but if the same streamlined process can be brought into how a startup can be closed, right, that will be the real game changer, because most of them are focused on making business easy. But if we can make the life of a founder easy, right, if we can legally close things and if there's no responsibility involved, I think that will be the biggest help for them.
Wonderful. Anupji.
Sure, Hiranmay, and all the inputs are brilliant, and I would just probably add suggestions from two perspectives. One from the startup perspective, I think it would be very worthwhile if a platform like iHub can provide them learnings from one engagement, whether it is good, bad, ugly, which in whichever form it is, convert that into a recommendation and make it visible for the rest of the startups. So one team has gone through a particular learning, and whatever works and whatever can accelerate things, if this is available for the rest of the startups, I think it would be a big shift for driving many of these engagements. So that's from a startup side. And coming from a corporate side, I would suggest you could use this platform also, or maybe perhaps you're already doing this, is to create a pool of experts. People are doing this purely out of passion and out of interest. So if you could have a pool of experts who can mentor these startups, not just in the initial creation phase, but at the later stage where they're talking about the product development and commercialization and getting this rolled out into the market, I think such a layer present and being easily accessible to such startups would make a widespread change to what it is today.
Wonderful, sir. Top suggestion. What the suggestions are very powerful. Aditji.
Hiranma, you always take me last year.
Not intentionally. You belong to Gujarat, and I think that I can afford coming you back to the last.
No, definitely. I think every point that the panelists have shared is extremely critical and immensely powerful in that sense. I think one piece which I would maybe add here is that for the last 5 years, the startup policy in general has been focused on volumes, which is a good thing. It's a prerequisite for anything else to happen. I think now is the time to shift to quality from a narrative perspective, which is say, it's okay to have maybe only 20 and not 80 incubators in the state, but 20 incubators which are world class, right? Where people want to come, not just in Gujarat, but people from the world want to come. And this would potentially somewhere mean that we are able to bring in great innovation managers, great incubation managers into the ecosystem who are able to stick around, where it's also viable for them to stick around, which is there. So I would say, how can we make the incubators more stronger? How can we make the incubation teams a lot more stronger? I think if we are able to do that, a lot of these things will start to get activated. It'll be easier to create better mentorship circles. It'll be easier to attract companies like Cisco, NetApp, STL, Google, MERS to come and engage with the ecosystem, because they would trust the people who are executing on the ground. So I would put a lot of focus on those incubation teams and those incubators and say that let's shift the discussion to quality.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for wonderful ideas. I have noted down all of these things. It was a real toast to learn from you. Now I will come back to Nagarjun sir, the Commissioner of Higher Education, Government of Gujarat, and our accelerator manager in the government. So Nagarjun sir, it's up to you. It's up to us now how to take this thing forward. So I would like to request you to share your views after listening to all the champions and summarize the conversation and take it towards the end of this.
Yeah, thank you, Hiranmai. It has been a very wonderful session because we got a very diversified and grounded perspectives from all the speakers. It has come with years of experience and insights. And rightly, we have had this session, and it's good that we have been able to rope in the acceleration managers of various major corporates. And one of the things that iHub is trying to do is convene the ecosystem. It was formed as a Section 8 company, and typically it was perceived to be supposed to be yet another incubator in Gujarat. But what gives us the slightly eminent status is that it is an initiative of the education department, that is the state government. So we are able to have a very sort of what I can say is that uh, brotherly attitude to all other incubators. There are more than 30 incubators in Gujarat, and each of them is focusing on different sectors or different technologies or domains and all that. So there is no one who can actually be the connector to all these incubators. So we consciously made the effort to position iHub as a convener and aggregator of the ecosystem, and incubation is one of the activities that we would be doing. So that was a conscious decision to play from the idea stage to the even series A, B, C, D, whatever it is, to that stage. We want to scale up to every step of the value chain, because it won't be feasible for any of the individual incubators to do that because of various reasons. So we have to collaborate. That is the one first point. Second is, we wanted to be the first landing point for anyone from the broader ecosystem of the nation or international ecosystem. When they want to reach here to a wider audience, we would be the first one to facilitate. So we are constantly looking at forming partnerships, and it was nicely put when Mr. Anup was mentioning about starting from an MOU and scaling it up. In fact, that is what we are trying to put in practice, to lock the commitment or to show a commitment officially, to start with a one-page MOU. In fact, our MOU is just one page, one paragraph. It just says that we intend to work together. That could be the least possible way to actually log in and say, yes, we are into a sort of working relationship. And in fact, that is what is our thinking also. Second is, we are trying to bring the various universities. We are trying to place them as the thought leader, action leader, and supporter for various institutions in their areas. It can be a geographical area, or it can be, for example, if it's a technological university, they have some eminence over all the technological institutions. So we are trying to use them as the interim step before we reach to the college and to the student. And SSIP policy is very open, that you can fund an innovator who may not be your student. Still, you will be able to fund it. So these are some of the things that sort of very open and entrepreneurial disruptive way of thinking that has been done and being put in practice. So that is how we are able to quickly scale iHub in the last 1 year into a as a organization which is able to make a national level impact also. And our constituency of Gujarat, where all the innovators and their mentors and catalysts, the supporters and teachers, we have groomed them in nurturing the incubation and startup ecosystem on IPR, and we are grooming the startups on the basics. So all these things were individually not possible for any of these incubators. So we are filling that gap of helping anyone in this ecosystem to move from a local play to a national or international play. That is where they connect with the HNIs. And again, we are working with HNIs and trying to convert them into angels. Yeah, that is in the investment side. And in the startup side, I think with Naveen or someone I was mentioning, we want our startups to be a potential candidate for you. That is a big jump between doing a startup at the local level and being considered at a big corporate accelerator or even an incubator level. So how do we bridge that gap? There is no steps or there is no seamless step. We are trying to fill that gap by providing the support ladder to move ahead of this. Even when we are talking to you guys, I still feel there is a gap in the lower segment, say where the 100 crore turnover type of organizations and MSMEs that Hiranmai was mentioning. We are trying to work with them because we can work with the MSME commissioner and ministry. We can work with the industries department and all that. So that way we are having a full matrix of movement. You can move left, you can move right, you can move up depending on your stage of the startup and your aspiration to move, whether you want to diversify laterally or and all that. And other point is when we talk about open innovation, we normally think about big corporates which pioneered the model of open innovation. How do we scale it down to a MSME level of open innovation? That is also still not experimented much. We have some collaborations, we have some industrial estates working with some incubators here and there. I have seen in Surat, I have seen in Ahmedabad and all that. But there are not standard processes. There are not clear-cut ways of scaling it up further. There are engagements, but then it is not very clear way of how to take it forward. So that is also another challenge, but we think working like this will provide that solution. So that way we are working at filling this gap between everyone from moving from level 1 to the national play or the international play. That is what the mainstream startup and ecosystem. So we have to somewhere bridge student startup from becoming just another NSS NCC type of project or activity to a real thing that has some value. That is why we are trying to fund these 1,000 ideas in the hope that even if 100 of them are able to graduate to that category, you are still making a bigger pipeline and you are making a seamless connectivity from the very small corner of the country to the top echelons of the startup world. Probably then they will shift it. So we need to assist at every place for everyone to move one level further, and that is where we look at partnership from you people all. And we are all very enthusiastic with the responses you are giving, the support you are giving, and the confidence you are posing in the sector where we are working. We will earn our confidence of iHub, but the confidence in the sector we are working, that you guys are doing, focusing on the right thing, that also gives us a clarity about acceptance of the industry, especially the funding industry, which I call the risk capital funding industry. So that way this session marks that milestone of creating a common discourse, creating a common vocabulary and themes that has been finalized today. I'm sure these themes will be further strengthened and we will work together, and we will try to bridge the gaps in the ecosystem down to the last innovator who would be still finding himself about asking where to go next. That is the aim, and we'll do that. Thank you so much. You all spent your valuable time with us, and I'm sure this 1 hour you spent would have been already watched by more than 10,000 people. We normally have a Facebook reach of 25,000 after 48 hours. So I am sure that we are offering good returns on your investment of time. Thank you so much for joining us today, and look forward to continuing this engagement in future also.
Thank you so much, sir, for wonderfully summing up. In fact, this brings to the end of this session. I must thank Atit for putting me in touch with so many wonderful friends in the ecosystem. And put on record that they're kind enough to introduce us to many of them. I thank Rohit and his team to connect me to Anupji. We have been talking on and off, but yes, absolutely, we'll be taking together the journey forward. Navinji, it was wonderful talking to you last week, and also picking your team how we can take it forward. Casey, no amount of words can thank you. Working out 4 a.m. in the morning at New York, joining to us and sharing.
Yeah, I have to also specially thank him for that.
So, Casey, it's really wonderful to have you today and your experience. Shruti, your story is quite inspiring. How do you move from an enterprise person working for a startup and now again working for a startup, but then a different role? It's something that gives us more fulfillment of gratifying life altogether. Thank you for Gauri for sharing your valuable ideas and insight. We learned a lot, and I'm sure Nagarjun sir will agree. I have learned much of my thing in my life, beyond classrooms. And all of you, when you teach us, it's again a classroom which was not in any of our course curriculum, but these are the real classrooms which teaches us. And Nagarjun sir, we agree that most of our classrooms which are designed in curriculum, I don't know how much they teach us, but teachers like you who bring in decades of, all of you brought in 2 decades of experience. We have 100-year worth of experience together. So all the students, innovators, startups, policymakers, industry people who listen to you are really indebted to you for sharing your candid thoughts, ideas, and insight. I thank Casey, Atif, Anup, Navinji, Shruti, and Gauri, and also Nagarjun sir. Thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. This was just the beginning, and I'm sure we will co-create these things further. And by next year, in this startup meet, we will have some progress. And as Nagarjun sir more told that we will give a good ROI to your investment of time to definitely come with some progress. Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you so much for joining. Namaste.